It took the shootout, but the Capitals pick up their first win of the regular season.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms, including the SiriusXM app and on YouTube. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. And the best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. I would love to talk Capitals hockey with you one-on-one, and we can do that on subtext. Just check the show description for more details. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. In today's episode of Locked On Capitals, we talk about how Darcy Kuemper saved the Capitals' butt, saving 38 of 40. No mistake about it. He is what saved the Capitals and ultimately why the Capitals picked up the win. We'll talk about that in the show. A little bit later, we will talk about how it was a big game for Matthew Phillips and Connor McMichael. But just to get it going here, the Caps finally pick up their first win of the season. And I say finally because, I thought that they were going to win the first one, of course. No, I kid. But the Caps do pick up their first win of the year. It took the shootout. It took Evgeny Kuznetsov with his slow entry and back and forth and back and forth. And boom, finds the back of the net. Does what he does so well. And one of the things that they talked about is what kind of entry he was going to have as he was going to do the shootout. In the preseason, we saw him kind of come in full speed ahead. So it was interesting. If I'm going to give him any advice, go ahead and go with the slow entry. That seems to work real well for you. So go ahead and do that. But it was a slow start to the game. And it was one of the games, like tonight, if you watch the game, if you only saw the first period, you could have easily thought to yourself, the Caps are going to win, or they're going to lose another one because they were not getting a lot of production in the first period. It was 17-3 shots on goal, 17 Calgary, 3 Washington. So they weren't generating a lot of real great opportunities. And you kind of took a look at Spencer Carberry on the bench when they panned over to him, and he looked frustrated. I think that he was thinking to himself, what do we do here? It was a team that was snake bitten, but they found their way a little bit later in the game. Just some highlights of the game is Huberdeau's cheap shot on Kuzi. And it was one of those things that, his face was against or away from him, and it was just his back. It was all he could see was his name and his numbers, or is his name and numbers, and he just smashed him into the boards. It does appear to me that should have probably been a penalty, but it wasn't the case, and they kind of went back and forth, mostly just shouting and finger pointing, that kind of thing. But Kuzi didn't, have a real great start to the game. He was in the penalty box twice in the first period alone. For a guy that is trying to, change his reputation on the team and try to say, hey, I'm a changed man and I can help contribute to this team. And ultimately, he did do that by finding the back of the net in the shootout. But being in the penalty box twice in the first period alone is definitely not what the doctor ordered. But in the first period, Darcy Kuemper keeping the Caps in it. Again, if you take a look at it, 17-3 being outshot. If it was, anything less of a netminder for the Capitals in net there, I think that it would have been a blowout. He really stood on his head and made some really great saves. One of the other things of note there that we saw in the game is you saw a little bit more Wilson physicality, one good skirmish. He needs to do more of that to rally the troops. And I know that I've heard different things that, and from Tom Wilson himself in different interviews, that he doesn't necessarily want to be that junkyard dog anymore. anymore. He doesn't want to be this goon that he's not going to drop the gloves at the drop of a hat anymore. But I think that, to a certain extent, when he's physical, when he asserts himself that way, it really rallies the troop. I think that, they needed to generate more opportunities. And I think to a certain extent, when you see that physicality and just slamming people into the boards, you see when Ovechkin does that as well, that it just really seems to fire everyone up. Backstrom played pretty well, all things considered, nearly scored on a PP towards the end of the first. So just some brief glimpses of greatness. Also Wilson off the crossbar. So, but not enough sustained pressure. And I think that that's what the Caps need to work on, is sustained pressure. They spent most of the time in their own end. That's never a recipe for success. And I think that that they were kind of disjointed to start the game. And I think between the periods there, that probably Spencer Carberry was talking to him and the coaches, and probably pulling out video footage or whatever the case may be, saying, listen, guys, this is what's going right and this is what's going wrong. And there wasn't a whole lot right going for the Capitals in the first period. But it was a big game for two young Capitals, and I'll talk about them in the next segment, is Matthew Phillips and Connor McMichael. It is interesting that the Caps are the second oldest team in the NHL. And, they did integrate some youth. You saw Malenstein and Phillips and McMichael. Alexiev out there, that's in the mix there as well. Also, we've seen Lucas Johansson out there. That there is slowly this integration of youth on this team. And it's interesting that the two goals in this game by the Capitals were from McMichael and they were from Phillips. And then, of course, Kuzi got the shootout as well. But the young guys stepping up. And that's encouraging for me, because, that was one of the big knocks against this team for the longest time, is that, they're old and they're not getting any younger. And this geriatric team isn't going to have what it takes to compete in this young, fast league. And I think that having Spencer Carberry at the helm and kind of a different mandate for this team, that finally they want to win a cup, they want to make it to the playoffs, of course, but they also want to bring along some of this youth. And it's interesting to me to see how the youth really kind of stepped up in this game. Again, just a really great acquisition for the Capitals, picking up Phillips, and McMichael finally solidifying his role on this team, usually in the top six. So it is a positive thing for me to see this youth infusion on this team that has kind of not been the MO for this team for the longest time. So I look forward to seeing what the Caps have, and who's going to be in the lineup in the next game against the Senators. But tonight, despite the fact that they had a slow start, the third period in particular for me was pretty good. I'm like, well, here we go. This is what I was talking about. Where was this in the first period of the game? And I guess I don't really care. When you take a look at the score sheet, it was a win. It's going to say SO next to it because it was a shootout win, but a win is a win, and I'm going to take it. I would have felt much worse if the Capitals found a way to lose this game. But again, there are certain things that they need to clean up, and the fact that they've been snake bitten as far as production goes, that's going to go back to the first game against the Pens as well. And that kind of just carried over into this game as well. But they found their way towards the end of the game. Let's build on that. Let's make that like a snowball that gets bigger and bigger, and hope that, when they start the next game against the Senators, that they don't have to wait till the third period to really apply the pressure, that they can bring it just from the get-go. All right, so coming up here after the break, we will talk about how it was a big game for Matthew Phillips and Connor McMichael, and how this youth infusion has really helped this team. We'll talk about that coming up. You shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you, with killer last-minute deals, all in all prices, views from the seat, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the worry out of buying tickets, and that's one of the tough things when a big event comes to your town, or your favorite sports team is playing, and you can't find tickets. That is why you need Game Time. They make it so easy. I've used it. I love it. I think you will love it as well. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code Locked On NHL. That's LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure and subscribe or follow Locked On Capitals wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. The regular season is here, and I've got you guys covered, so thank you for subscribing and following Locked On Capitals today. So getting used to these late games, man, it is 11:17 local as I record this. It's definitely something to get used to as we go into the season, but it was a big game for the Capitals. It was a big game for Matthew Phillips and Connor McMichael. Matthew Phillips, of course, is the player that we got from the Calgary Flames organization, a small guy, all things considered, but like I've always said, I don't really care what size he is, as long as he gets production, and he got that tonight with his first NHL goal. It was just a really great moment for him. He's only 25 years old, and he was what was key in the win. So the Capitals desperately needed a goal in this game. Make no mistake about it. I think that, they were starting to see, more shots on goal, but then it was a give and go with Sonny Milano, and then it delivered a great saucer pass. And that is ultimately how he scored it, kind of just right from the net front, kind of just almost like on a knee, and knocked it in. It was really great. So between Milano and Phillips, it was just a great shot. It was a great goal. And I think it's probably something that is going to be featured on the NHL network. But that is what really made it great. Then minutes later, Connor McMichael got his first NHL goal since March 26, 2022. To make it 2-2. So just a really great game for Matthew Phillips. Again, one of the guys that kind of had to really fight. I think he was one of the guys that came to the Capitals, and I don't think a whole lot of people were aware of him. If you're an everydayer, I spoke of how I heard about him from Jeff Merrick and how he talked about, this great player and what a steal it is for the Capitals to pick him up. And he has turned out to be that as well. And one of my things that I was concerned about him was his size. And one of the things that I heard in the broadcast tonight from Craig Laughlin was that he tries to put himself in a position where he is not going to get injured. He understands that he is not the biggest man on the ice. So what he does is he probably is not going to play the puck a lot, in the corner, or he's going to have his head on the swivel. And if he's going down the ice, he's going to keep his head up. What is one of the things that you always see most of the time when someone just really gets laid out is they're looking down at the ice and all of a sudden, just totally laid out. So I think that he has a good hockey IQ, and I think that he, understands, what is important and what he needs to do. So he's not going to get injured because, I think that the Capitals to a certain extent kind of took a gamble on him. And when I say gamble, I say based on his size. He is only 5'8" and just a small man, the smallest guy in the NHL. But he, so far has not let that hold that against him. There was another Capitals player that was really excited to see him out there tonight, and that was the captain, Alex Ovechkin. And why was this game important for Matthew Phillips? Of course, this was against his former team. And Alex Ovechkin says, they don't effing want you, but you know what? He asked, then led his teammates in song, we want you, baby. Ba, 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 ba. I need you, baby. So a good sense of humor from Alex Ovechkin, a good way of welcoming the young Capital to this team and just making him feel like he deserves to be here. And I think that, when these guys kind of toil down in the AHL for a while, they probably have a hard time seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. When am I going to get my big opportunity? I think I'm a pretty good hockey player, but why isn't this team, why don't they see it in me? And that in this case, that was the Calgary Flames and the Wranglers organization and the Stockton Heat. Is just that they didn't ultimately see what he had in the tank, and I think that is unfortunate. But I think that their loss is the Capitals' gain, as he really showed up to play a big night for the Capitals. He says it feels pretty good. I'll leave it at that. He said with a grin. And then that's what it's about. He came in and he contributed to this team, and the same thing goes for Connor McMichael. Just a pleasant surprise. For the longest time, I've heard that it's going to be the year for Connor McMichael. It's going to be the year for Connor McMichael. This is finally the year. Spencer Carberry on McMichael, very similar to his chance the other night that went off the post, attacking through the middle of the rink. I've said it to him a ton. He's looked fantastic over the past month through training camp. He's carried that over in the first few games. So just to underline this segment it was the youth on this team, excuse me, that really stepped up. It was Darcy Kemper, who I'll talk about in the next segment, that saved the Capitals. And, they could stand to get more production from the veterans. I know that Oshie hit it off the crossbar, and I know that Wilson hit it off as well. But it's interesting that it was the young guys that get it done. And ultimately, I don't care who it is that is going to get the goals as long as they pick up the win, because being 0-2 to start this season would have been a really difficult thing for the Capitals to overcome. So just a big night for two young guys on the team, Matthew Phillips and Connor McMichael, proving to everyone why they deserve a role on the Capitals on a night in and night out basis. And I definitely look for more from them as the season continues. All right, so coming up here after the break, we will talk about how Darcy Kemper saved the Capitals' butt. Make no mistake about it. If Darcy was not in net, if it was anyone less than that, I think the Capitals would have struggled. I'll talk about him more coming up. Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. And one of the things that I like about it is if you're watching a game and say you're not that into it, if you have a little bit of money on the game, it makes watching the games that much more exciting. You could have some money on an upcoming Capitals game or a Commanders game. That's what makes it so exciting. So visit fanduel.com/locked-on and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So one of the things that the Capitals were not able to do in the first period and the second period to a certain extent was generate opportunities. Who was able to generate opportunities was the Calgary Flames. It was definitely tilted in their favor. And if it was not for Darcy Kemper standing on his head, making the saves that needed to be saved, there is no doubt in my mind that the Capitals would be 0-2 on the season. And I think that, to the people that said, why did they sign Darcy Kemper on this team? Why wasn't there a better option? I think that he proved to everyone why he belongs to be here. It was a bit of an interesting thing in the net minding department for the Capitals as Charlie Lindgren appeared to sustain an injury in the morning skate, the optional skate today. So they had to call up a netminder for the second time in a row. Clay Stevenson was the backup. So an interesting thing for the Capitals. I hope that Charlie Lindgren is not going to miss too much time, but I think that they have a viable option in Clay Stevenson. I do think that Darcy Kemper will probably get a majority of the action going forward. But taking a look at the game, saved 38 of 40. I don't think we could ask a whole lot more from him. I guess a perfect game would be what we could ask, but I don't think that's realistic considering the amount of shots that he faced. And he didn't really falter. I didn't really see him, out of position. I didn't see him struggling. Not too bad for a man that just became a father the other day here. And he got a little bit emotional when talking with the Caps press about it and what it meant. But just a really great moment for Darcy, both personally and professionally. He just standed on his head. Kemper also shut down a big breakaway in the game from Blake Coleman. And then there was the penalty shot that came for number 20 off that play. He ended the night with 38 saves on 40. And then also what stepped up big was the penalty kill, killing 4 penalties. So that was one of the things that really helped out the Capitals was just stepping up and slamming the door when it needed to be slammed, and Darcy Kuemper saving a Caps team that struggled. Even though the puck was in the Capital zone for a lion's share of the game, he found a way to pick up a big win. So Alexi Protas, another guy that pops off the sheet. He had 3 shots on goal, but kind of the interesting thing about that is his time on ice for Alexi Protas was only 8:46. So kind of an odd stat there. But the Capitals getting production towards the end of the game. Darcy Kuemper slamming the door. It was definitely a group win, suffices to say. I would say that Darcy Kuemper bears the majority of the credit for the Capitals picking up the big win, but it was a group win. It was a group win from Alexi Protas, who I think ultimately still kind of has to prove his role on this team. I know that he stepped up really big in camp last season, but it's about sustainability. Is he going to be able to sustain and, have a role on this team on a night in and night out basis? Also, you take a look at Anthony Mantha. What is the long term for him? We know that he was out in favor of Alexi Protas. And we also know that Alexiev was in tonight in the game over Lucas Johansson. So I think that the Capitals, I think Spencer Carberry and Brian McClellan have some questions. But a lot of questions were answered tonight. I think that Matthew Phillips is the real deal. I think Connor McMichael deserves a role on this team for the duration of the season. And Darcy Kuemper is, as advertised, one heck of a goalie. Kind of killed it at every place that he stopped. We remember him winning the Stanley Cup with the Colorado Avalanche and has come here. And let's kind of just take a look back, before Darcy came here, is that, there was rumblings that he could come to the Capitals, and everyone said, well, there's no way he's going to come to the Caps. As it turns out, he did, and has just really been a steady force on a team that's had an abundance of wealth at the net-minding position. If we think before that, it was Braden Holtby. So to go from one consistent netminder, of course, there was the Vanacek and Samsonov debacle, but to go from that, then to go to Darcy Kuemper and Charlie Lindgren is just assuring, because let's face it, those years with Samsonov and Vitek Vanacek were rough years. We always heard that it was going to be their years, and it never was really the case. And Samsonov isn't exactly killing it in Toronto this year, so it is a wise move. And one of the things that I've always lauded Brian McClellan on is that he didn't want to retain either one of those goalies. He said that he had seen enough and brought in what you see now is just this stud group with Darcy Kuemper and Charlie Lindgren, and I think is going to be the Caps saving grace this season, because I see more games like this season. I hate to say it. I see, more games where, they're having a hard time generating opportunities. It just seems, at least in the beginning of the season, I know we're only 2 games in, but they've struggled to generate opportunities. So it's really great that you have, a backstop in Kuemper or Lindgren. But one of the things that we need to remember is what Spencer Carberry said, is that one of the Achilles heels for this team last season was odd man breaks, right? We remember that. And what are we seeing, in this game last night or today, depends on when you're listening to this podcast, is, that the goalies were under pressure almost the entire game. And thank God that Darcy Kuemper was dialed in, because sometimes you see goalies that aren't dialed in, and then you see those teams struggle. But all things considered, a rough start, but found a way to pick up a win. That is what is important, is picking up the win at the end of the day. And they found a way to do it. Even though they had a tough start, they found a way to persevere. And sometimes the valor of this game is more important than that, say, they just totally steamrolled a team. And I'm glad it wasn't the reversal where they were coming on strong and then took their foot off the gas. This was a team that was up against it to start this game. And, they could have just, kind of tuck their head in and put their head into their shell and said, just let this game be over with. But no, there was fight in this team. And that fight is ultimately why this team won the game. And it was coming from some young sources, maybe some unexpected sources. And it was coming from veterans welcoming the young players in, and just a real making of a great marriage between youth and veteran players. And I think that is ultimately going to be the Capitals' recipe for success. All right, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Washington Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. If it wasn't for you, this show would not be nearly as successful. So definitely thank you for watching and listening every day. And are you a fan of other DC sports? Well, Locked On has got you covered. We have Locked On Nationals, Commanders, Wizards. So no matter what major DC sport it is, Locked On has got you covered, not to mention Locked On NHL, available on all the major podcast platforms and on YouTube. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.